to Barclay Damon's Labor and Employment Podcast's newest episode, Overtime 201. I'm welcomed here to be here with my esteemed colleague, Rosemary. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Lee. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. And I'm glad that we're together again to continue the conversation, a more elevated conversation on overtime. As if you're a loyal listener of ours, you know we've just finished a 2-part series on the basics of overtime in New York State and discussing salary exemptions and things to that nature. But Rosemary and I thought that we should continue the conversation with some higher level concepts, and we're going to do that by asking each other some questions. Some of them we don't know each other's questions, so you might hear some shock and awe, but and you also might hear how the sausage is made, hear how lawyers go through the process, ask some other questions, and we feel that by peeling the curtain back a little bit, it might be interesting. So that'll be one of the questions that we'll ask you at the end to give us some feedback if you'd like to this concept. But as usual, before we jump into it, Rosemary, fun facts. Do you want to go first or should I? What do you think? This one we did pre-discuss, so you tell me, because I don't know your fact, you know mine. So I don't know.
Yes, you go first. You go first.
Okay. So hopefully we talked in the last episode about how Rosemary and I both like to sit in the sun. Hopefully, if you're viewing us, you can see I have hopefully what is showing is a nice tan. I just came back from Bali. My boyfriend and I took my mother for her 70th birthday. It was a complete surprise. We didn't tell her where she was going. About 4 months ago, we told her just pack a bag with beach clothes and be ready to go. And she was a trooper, never left the country. And we went, had an amazing time. But the fun fact, and I think the funny fact of this is that since she didn't know where she was going, she couldn't prep for it. But on the way back, the way leaving from Bali, she got to watch Eat, Pray, Love. And for those of you that don't know, that's a movie with Julia Roberts where she goes to Italy to eat, India to pray, and then Bali to love. I look over to my mother about an hour and a half into the flight. She's in total tears going, why didn't you let me watch this before I went to Bali? But that's my fun fact for the day.
That's great. I did not know. I knew what Eat, Pray, Love was about, but I didn't realize that the love part was in Bali. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, so I had said to Lee, since he was talking about Bali, I would just share the fun fact that years ago, it was forever ago, Lee, that I went to Bali. So I think, as probably many of you know, I was with Oracle Corporation for 16 years, and it was a club. So an achievement club. And so a lot of large companies will do these achievement clubs. And the highest level that particular year was that you could go to Bali. And so that's how I ended up in Bali. And we went in early and extended. So, we were there for a pretty good amount of time. So I guess the fun fact is I got to Bali on Oracle's dime. Thank you, Larry Ellison. And the other thing is, and people may not think this is a fun thing, Lee, but I think you and I talked about it. When we went there, we had said we want to get out and see the culture, leave the resort property, which I'm sure you did also. And one of the things, they're very spiritual in Bali. And so when someone passes, the funeral procession goes through the village where that person lived. And so the person is put on I don't know what the word would be, but because they're not in a casket, I can't remember, but it's like this
like a raised platform.
Yes. And they carry them through the streets and they throw flowers. And I mean, it is deeply, deeply moving because they are truly celebrating that person and their life. And so we actually went to one of those. And we were lucky enough, which I know sounds like a crazy word to use, but someone had lost, a family had lost a loved one, and they're more than happy to welcome others to join in the celebration. So
it is as close to paradise as possible, and
yeah.
The Balinese people are one of the most welcoming and warm people that I've ever encountered in the world. And a fun fact of Bali, and then I think we should move on. So this isn't the Bali podcast,
That's
but
right.
Bali's known as the island of the gods. We learned on a tour we went on that even though Indonesia is a Muslim country, the island of Bali is majority Hindu. And that's why the island is filled with temples and statues almost everywhere of various Hindu gods.
Yeah.
It is it's paradise for those that are lucky enough to get there. And I'm very grateful, obviously, that I was able to do this, but it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I'm sure, Rosemary, it sounds like your experience was equally amazing as well.
It was. So, but now to the more mundane, Lee.
Yes. And overtime, right? So, so just to set the conversation, get us to where we were before. So presumptively in New York State, when you work more than 40 hours in one work week, now notice that I said the word work more than 40 hours in one work week, you are due overtime. And overtime is 1.5 times your regular hourly rate. Now, the last episode discussed how you are exempt from overtime. Now, you become exempt from overtime, meaning you don't have to pay an employee for working more than 40 hours in a week, so long as they meet the following 3 requirements. We pay them a salary. That salary is enough. That's $1,200 in New York City, Long Island, and Westchester, $1,200 per week, or $1,112.50, I think, everywhere else per week. And you fall into one of the exemption categories. And in New York, there was the EAP, if you remember, executive, administrative, that's the $1,200 or $1,112.50, or professional, which is still with the federal threshold, which is about $700 or so per week. But so that's the basics, right? So we talked about when you must pay overtime and when you must not pay overtime. So today's conversation is about those extra credit, those higher level overtime questions. So,
and actually, Lee, before you do that, I'm going to jump in. I think everybody knows Lee and I always just jump in within when we're chatting about this. So you heard Lee say that work, emphasis on work. We'll talk about that in a second. But 2 other things I want to point out. You notice he said work week. All right. So Lee, is the work week just like Monday to Friday? I mean, what do they mean when they say work week?
So it's whatever it's not necessarily the calendar week. It's whatever you as your business sets as your work week. And it must be the same work week for all employees. So you can't put, certain classes or certain individuals having, Tuesday to Wednesday for some, others Sunday to Saturday, whatever it may be. But some businesses may have a good reason for deviating from a calendar week, because you find that most of your employees do their work over like a 3-day period, like 10 hours in a 3-day period. So break your work week in the middle, right? So if they 10 hours on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, have your work week break from on Tuesday, Wednesday, so that way you can cut or move those 10 hours to another week. So you can be logistical and strategical, if that's even a word.
I don't think that's a word.
Deploy strategery to make sure to get the benefit of still paying your employees properly. And it's okay to do that because you're giving them notice, right? You got to give them notice in your handbook, on posters, on forms of what your work week is.
Yep, exactly. So I just wanted to make that point because I think it's important. I think some people think, oh, it's Monday to Friday, or, it's got to run Sunday to Saturday. As you said, it's whatever you define it as. The other thing is when Lee just said, your regular hourly rate. The only thing I would say there, Lee, and tell me if you would agree with this, I might put an even finer point on it and say your regular rate of pay.
Yeah.
Based on what you and I are going to talk about in this, episode.
Yep. I think that's exactly right. Because you'll see that, so obviously hourly workers, I think it's built into our consciousness that you work overtime, you work more than 40, you get overtime, and at your regular hourly rate derives your overtime rate. So if minimum wage in New York City 16, in Long Island and Westchester. Forgive me, I'm not neglecting Long Island or Westchester, but I'm just going to use New York City from now on during the conversation.
Yep.
And every upstate, everywhere else being $15 an hour. So in New York City, your overtime rate is $24 an hour, 1.5 times. Upstate, it's $22.50, 15 times 1.5, coming to $22.50. But there's the class of employees that we pay a salary to, right? That if you may not fall into one of those exemption categories that we talked about. And that's, Rosemary, you hit the nail on the head. That's where thank you for the correction to me. It's your regular rate of pay. And based upon some of the questions that we're going to throw back, I'm going to put up on the screen some wage acknowledgement forms, and we'll make them available for download on the website as well. That will help guide our discussion and hopefully give you the word. If listening isn't enough, you can actually see in words these concepts that we're talking about.
Right, for the visual learners, as we say, right?
Exactly.
The types of learners, the audio, the visual, and the kinesthetic. So try to hit on all of them. So. Right.
Absolutely. So, Rosemary, do you want to? I feel like we're playing password. Do you want to give the clue or take the clue this one? I defer to you. What do you want to go?
I'll take the clue this time.
All right.
Hopefully, I know the answer. I'm ready. Go ahead.
All right. So, Rosemary, so the first one up to you. So we've discussed where if you're a salaried employee and you're exempt from overtime, you don't have to pay overtime. So what about those non-exempt salaried employees?
Yeah.
Do we have to pay them overtime? And if so, how do we figure it out?
Yep. And as you know, Lee, as you and I discussed, and just a reminder to all of our listeners, remember, people will sometimes say, oh, someone is salaried, I don't have to pay them overtime. No, are they non-exempt or are they exempt? Because as Lee and I discussed in a previous episode, you can have salaried, non-exempt. And that's what Lee's talking about here. What do you do with a salaried, non-exempt employee? And it's kind of straightforward, but I'm going to give you two answers to that, Lee. The first is, if you have someone that regularly works 40 hours, all right, so they're a non-exempt. They're classified as non-exempt. They regularly work 40 hours, but we pay them a salary. And I have quite a few employers who do that. And somebody may say, why do they do that? And part of it is, quite frankly, it's an ego thing for their employees, right? They want to say, I'm a salaried employee. So we've got a salaried non-exempt who regularly works 40 hours. In a week, if they work, or if they're going to work 41 or 42 or 43 as these one-offs, the way we calculate their hourly rate of pay, because again, we calculate overtime, as Lee and I have discussed it, it's 1.5 times your regular rate of pay. So we're going to take the 40 hours, because that's normally what they work, and we're going to divide it by their cell rate. And whatever that number is, that is the hourly rate. And we're going to apply that then, we then come up with our 1.5 of that. So if they're making $10 an hour, they never would, because that's not the minimum wage, but I'm really bad with math, Lee, as you know. So if it turns out, when we do that math of dividing 40 hours by the salary that we pay them, it's $10 an hour, their overtime rate is going to be $15. So that one's really easy. Now, we may have an individual who we bring them in and we say, all right, actually, we're expecting you to work 50 hours a week. So again, in that instance, we're going to divide the 50 hours by the salary, come up with the same number. So, Lee, everybody's sitting there thinking, well, that's pretty straightforward, Rosemary, but in case, so you don't have to rewind, Lee, is there a form or anything that our listeners can look at? And actually, more importantly, the better question, that was a really bad setup. To our listeners, I apologize. Terrible setup for Lee. The better way to think about this is, you have a salaried, non-exempt employee. What wage notice do I give them, Lee? That's really what the question is, right?
Sure. So you have a salaried exempt employee, a non-exempt employee, excuse me. So I'm going to share my screen here. Now, if you remember, for those of that are our loyal listeners, and apologies, but for our first-time listeners, there is something called the Wage Theft Prevention Act in New York State. And the as part of the Wage Theft Prevention Act, you are required to give to your employees within a short time of them being hired a wage acknowledgement form. And there are different forms for different types of employees in the state of New York. The first form that I have up on the screen is an LS-59 form. Notice that it says right at the very top, this is a notice for exempt employees. So this is the form that goes to your exempt employees that are exempt from being paid overtime. So Rosemary, yeah, excellent question. Which form do I give? We've got two potential forms that can be given to employees that make a salary and are exempt. So the first one is the LS-56. And the LS-56 says at the stop, notice for employees paid a weekly rate or salary for a fixed number of hours, 40 or fewer in a week. So this is your employees that work hourly, and they generally work less than 40 hours per week. And here, if this is someone that, as Rosemary said, they want to be paid a salary because it is a thing of pride for them. And note, it says on this form that this does not apply to hospitality workers. It cannot be anyone in the hospitality industry. This form does not apply. And essentially, hospitality, these next two forms do not apply to you. So go take a cup of coffee. You can take a break if you're in the hospitality industry here, because if you use these forms, you're going to get into trouble. So think of some employee that what's a good example, Rosemary, of an employee that would be paid a salary basis that's working 40 hours fewer in a week?
I work with a lot of healthcare. All right. And so the individuals, like some of the counselors and that, they only work, they actually work 37.5 hours every single week religiously. That's it.
So, and then they get paid a flat amount for the week?
That's exactly, they get paid. Yep, exactly.
So here, I'm going to do math here because it just makes it easier for me. Simple numbers. So let's say they're getting paid $2,000 a week as a counselor, and they're 37.5 hours per week. The reason why, and Rosemary made a point that I got to be very salient here to everyone. You have to still make sure we're hitting minimum wage. So that's why I'm using $2,000, right? So if minimum wage in everywhere but New York City is $15 an hour and they're $37.50 per hour, this salary per week must be at least $562.50 per hour to be paying minimum wage for the week. But let's say we agree to pay them $20 an hour, and it's $37.50 per week. What Rosemary hit a point that is crucial here, because some people, an employee and an employer, may think because they're paying someone a salary, then it doesn't matter because I'm paying them a salary. I don't need to follow minimum wage. We have to make sure whatever we're paying someone, like for example, if this is $1,000 per week, and the form wants us to specify the number of hours for which this weekly rate will be paid, right, is 40 hours. Okay, 40 divided by 1,000 comes to $25 an hour. We're in minimum wage, we're clear. But if it's $500 per week and they're working 40 hours, 38 hours per week, right? With 38 times 15 is less than $500. So we're going to be violating minimum wage rules. So we have to make sure here we're doing, whether this is a weekly rate, a semi-monthly rate, or whatever it may be, it's the number of weekly hours when we divide the math out from here that we are still paying at least minimum wage. So so for this employee who generally works less than 40 or fewer hours per week, we would then, to calculate their overtime rate of pay, is we would take whatever we pay them for during the course of the week, divide by 40, and then divide that, and then times that number by 1.5. So if someone's paid $1,000 per week, we divide that by 40. And I've got my calculator here up on the screen. I'm not sure if you all can see it, but the math is pretty simple. So it's 1,000 divided by 40 comes to $25 an hour would be my regular hourly rate. And then I times that by 1.5 to come to my overtime rate, which is $37.50. So any hours for this employee who generally works 40 or fewer in a week would be then paid at $37.50 for that week. Pretty simple, pretty easy for these employees that generally work 40 or fewer in 1 week. But for employees that work more than 40 hours per week,
like my 50 example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is someone who's working more than 50, and it varies week per week.
Mm-hmm.
So here I have up on the screen, it is the LS57. The LS57 is a notice for employees paid a salary for varying hours, day rate, piece rate, flat rate, or other non-hourly pay. I note here that in my practice, Rosemary, I tell my clients that if you've got someone that you want to pay a weekly salary and they're working more than 50 hours per week and they're not exempt from overtime, just pay them hourly. Because what I'm about to talk about here is a nightmare in the process of how do you have to figure it. Just pay them hourly. It just is nuts. So let's say you've got someone that you agree that you're going to pay. It has to, again, be at least minimum wage for the week, for whatever it should be. So for your employee, Rosemary, 50 hours per week, how much are they being paid per week? Let's do the math.
So you want me to just pick a number?
Yeah, pick a number. Give me some numbers.
Let's do $1,800.
So $1,800 per week, and it's for 50 hours per week.
Right.
So here, what we need to do following the form, it says on the form, so it would be $1,800 per week.
Mm-hmm.
In most cases, the overtime rate will be 1.5 times the regular rate of pay for the week. The regular rate of pay is the total weekly pay divided by the hours worked in the week. So it's not in the planned week, the hoped for week, what's in the job description week. It is the actual week. So that means your overtime rate is going to change week by week. So let me share my screen here, and hopefully I can actually bring up the calculator, because to show the nightmare that this can be. Window and calculator, entire screen. Here we go. So I have up on my screen here a calculator, and side by side to that, the LS57. So we have $1,800 per week someone is being paid, and they worked, first, let's see if it passes the minimum wage test. Mm-hmm. So we're going to divide by 40, $45 an hour. We're in the clear. Good. Okay. So $1,800 an hour divided by 50 hours per week for that work week is $36 an hour. So you are having to agree. So you're paying your employee for the first 40 hours, $1,800. And now for the next 10 hours, $36 an hour, an additional $360 per work week. So in reality, because you want to pay your employee a salary for whatever reason, rather than a weekly hour, you're paying them more. You're now actually going to be paying them $2,160 per week. A lot of money. But if they work 55 hours in a work week, or let's say they're working 70 hours in a work week, okay? So 70 hours in a work week, we do again, 18 was the number 1,800, Rosemary? 1,800 divided by 70. Mm-hmm. So that's $25 an hour is their regular rate. Now their overtime rate is 1.5 times. So the benefit is $38.57. So the benefit of this, right, is the more overtime someone works, the less their overtime rate could be. But you're agreeing to pay them more immediately from the get-go. And your systems now have to be set up to track these numbers, because their overtime rate is going to change week by week by week. So,
and I'm sorry to interrupt, Lee, but I was just going to say, I think to me, that's the biggest hassle, is that every single week you've got to calculate this.
So that's why for this employee that's 1,800 and they're working 50 hours a week, embrace it. Give them an hourly wage form. They're $36 an hour, and their overtime rate is, and then what their overtime rate is always is $54 an hour. And then that advise my clients when you're now faced with this is that, okay, now your problem here is that you've got employees working overtime. Perhaps maybe you should hire another employee if this overtime rate is too high, because the administrative burden is too much. And as we've talked about, if you make a mistake here, there's that whole cascading waterfall of damages that you could face, that your pay stubs are wrong, your wage acknowledgements are wrong, administrative fines, doubling liquidated damages, administrative attorney's fees, interest, et cetera, et cetera. Just convert to the hourly rate. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Lee, we were just talking about, calculating their rate of pay. So 2 questions. The first one is just to make sure everybody knows where to find these forms. Where do they find the 2 forms you just showed them?
So first, you can either find them on our website. We'll put them up on our website, and below is the links here for the podcast. But you can also find them from the New York State Department of Labor website. Literally, you just Google LS57, LS56, 55, 54, or just even a wage acknowledgement form, and they will show up as the first numbers that pop up on the state's website. Fun fact about the wage acknowledgement forms: they are made available in the top, I think, 13 spoken languages in the state of New York. So you must give the form to your employee in the language that they speak. So if you have a Spanish speaker and you know they don't speak English, and you give them the English form, and it's the most beautiful, perfect, best, well filled out form in the world, it does not matter because it needs to be given to them in Spanish. But if you have an employee who does not speak a language that the state does not provide, then you can give them that form in English. But if the form is there from the language they speak, you must give them to that form in the language they speak.
Yep, great. And then so now I'm going to give you a question.
Sure.
And it's related, obviously, to what we were just talking about. So we were just calculating the overtime rate based on their salary, all right, and then their hours worked and that. All right, so let's not worry about salaried non-exempt anymore. We've just got a non-exempt employee. We pay this non-exempt employee hourly, and they, during the week, I'm just going to use a real world example. I work with a client who owns a restaurant, and they post on the time cards, where people sign in, Lee, they've got at the bottom a list of the less desirable jobs. So cleaning the fryer, let's say cleaning the restrooms or something like that. And so a person who does that job will then initial that I did that job. And depending on, what the job is, they will get a bonus. So, cleaning out the fryer is $35. Cleaning the restroom is $75. Okay, so they get this bonus. Does that factor in at all to the overtime rate?
It does. Excellent question, Rosemary. This is something that so first, hospitality people, welcome back. Please join the conversation. This applies to everybody, both hospitality and non-hospitality. Don't worry, non-hospitality will tell you when you can go grab your coffee break in a moment. This is a transitional question into the two topics. But this is something called the overtime true up nightmare. It's literally a term of art. You Google it, the overtime true up nightmare. So there are 2 types of bonuses: contingent and discretionary. Discretionary is ones that you give to everyone or no one for no reason or any reason at all. Your employees don't have to do anything to obtain this type of bonus. A contingent,
and they don't expect it.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas a contingent bonus here is literally up on a board. It says, if you do this job, I will pay you this amount. Contingent, I do the work, I now expect to get paid. So this overtime true up nightmare became a true nightmare for a lot of my clients during the pandemic, when they were offering bonuses to employees to when they start working. That in order to get someone to work for them, to come back into the workforce, they were giving them a $2,000 sign-on bonus. But that sign-on bonus was spread out over months of time. So you needed to continue. Exactly. You needed to continue working in order to obtain that bonus over time. So now it moved. And if I just got it from just showing up on day one, the full amount, it would be discretionary and I would just get it immediately. But now because I had to continue working, it was contingent. So if your employees and receive a contingent bonus and they do not work any overtime, mazel tov, they get the bonus. They work overtime, that bonus now inflates their hourly rate. So let's say, for example, you have someone who was working minimum wage, upstate New York, $15 an hour, and their overtime rate was $22.50. They worked 50 hours for the week. I'm going to pull up my calculator here, and hopefully the screen will share. Here we go. Share screen. Window, calculator. So we have an employee who works 40 hours a week, minimum wage. So that's $15 an hour. And during this week, they worked 10 additional hours of work. So let's do the math here. 40 times 15. That would be, no, that's 400 times 15. Apologies there. 40 times 15. So that's $600 of regular pay for the first 40 hours of work. Their overtime pay would be for they work 10 hours of overtime times $22.50, which is the overtime rate. So now they're up to $825 for the week. That's what we've paid them for the week. But now in your scenario, Rosemary, we have someone who got what, $50 for cleaning the dishes, let's say?
Yep.
So we've now paid them $650 of regular pay for the week. 650 divided by 40. Their new hourly rate is $16.25. They've increased. We don't need to now pay them more for the hourly rate because they still are being paid minimum wage for what their regular amount was. We're doing this process to get the new overtime rate. So we times that times 1.5 to come to $24.37.50 or $24.38. So their overtime rate increased by minus $22.50, increased by $1.88. So they worked 10 additional hours that week. We owe them an additional $18.75 for that week because they worked overtime and because we gave them this contingent bonus.
Yeah.
Please, Rosemary.
I was just going to say again to summarize and Lee, just correct me if I summarize it incorrectly, but basically, listeners, what you're going to do is this is what they get paid. This is what they earn. I'm going to add this amount to it, the bonus, the $50 divided by the hours worked, and you've got your overtime, the rate of pay for that week. Right,
exactly.
And then based on that, you do your overtime. It's just that simple. So, but it's important for you to know you have to include it. And you may think, oh, it's $1.87, big deal. But as Lee and I always say, that was one person. If you're doing
one person, 1 week.
That's right. One person, 1 week. All right. So it could be everybody. And I posed this question to Lee because this client who I'm discussing is right now is subject to a DOL audit, just random. And this was discovered. So, but as he said, one person, 1 week, but then it's going to bleed down into everything else, right, that we've talked about. So, I had to bring that up, Lee. And so similarly, Lee, let me ask. So now we just said we have to add the contingent bonuses in. All right. So somebody takes a day off and has 8 hours of vacation. All right. They've got 8 hours of vacation, and then they work 30. They actually work 33 hours. So now on their paycheck, it's going to say, or their pay stub, that they're being paid for 41 hours because they had 8 hours of vacation and they worked 33. They're now overtime. How do I calculate that, Lee?
Well, I'm going to sidestep your question for a moment and say to our listeners, do not rely on your payroll company. Make sure that they are doing this right, because here in this scenario, right, Rosemary, the answer is they they're not owed overtime for that week, because the very first thing I said is worked hours in the work week. So your pay stub, right, should have a line item for vacation, PTO, whatever it is, that shows 8 hours, and then regular hours, 33 hours. And then that's it. If you just have it as a line item that says regular hours, 41, and you don't pay them overtime for that period, because we know that's the way it's supposed to be. Everyone is happy today, but they may not be happy 6 years from now when you're the subject of a Department of Labor audit or a private lawsuit, because you don't have proof of your records as to what actually happened during that period. So it's crucially important to make sure your records properly reflect vacation, sick time, because you do not have to pay overtime on those hours.
Yep. And so, as Lee said, so it's going to be your PTO. It's also your holiday pay, right? Because a lot of employers pay holiday pay. What did we say? We said sick, PTO, holiday pay.
Any of your other leaves that you have, voting leave, bone marrow leave, any of those leaves, unpaid leaves don't go into this also.
That's right, because it's all worked hours. It's hours actually worked. And Lee, your point was brilliant to make that, if the pay stub is wrong, it just says regular hours, like you said, 5 or 6 years from now, when you can't reconstruct it, you don't have anything to support it. Now, all of a sudden, hey, you owe these people overtime. And then there's liquidated damages and interest and everything else that goes on top of it. So make sure your payroll company is doing it right. Make sure it's on the pay stubs correctly. The other thing is, I always encourage my clients in their handbooks, Lee, to put language in there specifically that says that holiday, sick, all of those, they do not factor into the overtime calculations. So, and it is in all the different sections. And in the overtime section, we make sure that it says this is based on hours actually worked.
Absolutely. And another, and to go back to the overtime true-up nightmare, don't trust your payroll companies to know about that also as well. While this is a national concept that affects everybody under the Fair Labor Standards Act, your payroll companies may not be sophisticated enough to know this, because no one's told them that this bonus was contingent versus discretionary. Mm-hmm. And also, mind you, if you pay someone that bonus, let's just say, for example, change the fact pattern a little bit, from rather than being $50 per dishwasher or cleaning service that they provide, you just pay them an additional $1,000 at the end of the month for doing the dishes, right? That's because that's what they get. You would take the bonus, and what that bonus period is now divided by 4 for each week, and then you would add $250 to each week. So you take the bonus divided amount across the time that it's been proven, that it's been proofed for, and then you add that to each weekly period. Again, your payroll providers may not know this, so please double check with them, and of course check with us. We're here to help you navigate these issues, because they are tricky and intricate and hidden, and they could come back to bite you in a very significant way.
Well, and Lee, you're spot on. We've got this DOL audit going on right now. They have a payroll company. Payroll company had no idea. So these employees were just getting the $50 or the $25 or the $35, it was just listed on there as a bonus. And it was not calculated, it was not added into the rate of pay for calculating overtime. So that is a real life story happening literally right now. And we've had to correct that.
I think, Rosemary, we've probably been going for about 30 minutes or so. I think perhaps we should, do a break here. As usual, we have our good intentions to get this all done in one, but we just can't, because we just have so much we want to impart to everyone. So I think we'll turn this into a two-parter. We'll take a break here for now, but I think some questions to ask to the audience, and please, those of you that have been giving us feedback, we love it. Please like, subscribe if you're listening to us on YouTube. Direct message us through YouTube. Post if you're watching us through LinkedIn. Please like and comment on there. Direct message us. Shoot us an email. We're here to help. And if you're listening to us on Spotify, here are your poll questions. Question 1: have you ever heard of the overtime true-up nightmare before? Yes or no?
And are you now going to lose sleep over it because you're like, oh no?
And
Sorry,
that's the hidden question too. That's implied in the yes, or excuse me, in the no. And then question 2 is: do you actually have employees that are paid a salary but are non-exempt from overtime? Yes or no? We're actually curious to hear if that is something you fall into, because as like we said, is that really a good idea? And perhaps engage with us so you can tell us why you think it's a good idea and why it helps your business model. One of the things one of my mentors told me when I first started practicing law, that the practice of law is open book. We're not doing heart surgery, having to cut wires on a bomb. We are here to make everyone better. So if you've got a good reason as to why you are paying your non-exempt employees a salary, tell us so we can help others model after you and do the good stuff. Any closing thoughts before we say goodbye for now, Rosemary?
No, I guess what I'd say is everybody go and get a cup of coffee now. Do a lap, get your hourly steps in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, we'll talk to everyone soon. Thanks again.
The Labor and Employment Podcast is available on barclaydamon.com, YouTube, and all your favorite podcast streaming platforms. Like, follow, share, and continue to listen. Thanks.